It is safe to say there has been a fair number of videos on the internet that go into why this film is subpar, or why it's an underrated gem, so I want to avoid as best as possible ground already covered. Here I want to dive into the personal and give you my perspective on this movie, how significant I think it is to the overall story of Ellen Ripley and the Xenomorph at large, and what religious subtext the film has woven into its plot. My blurred memory of first seeing this movie dates back to when I was approximately 5 or 6 years old. A family member had recorded it off TV and somehow I got to watch it. This TV cut came into the movie at the scene where Dr. Clemens first wakes up Ripley in the infirmary. Quite apt if I do say so myself, because like Ripley I had no idea what was going on. I was with the character waking up to this hellish prison and finding out she was the only survivor from the previous movie. Then, as the events of the film played out, I would learn of her past missions, including one with Marines, which got me excited to see one day. I remember the film scaring me with its gloomy atmosphere, fast-running creature, its unapologetic gore, plentiful swearing and interesting characters. I was scared but mesmerised. Being so young I didn't understand all of what was being said, or exactly the nuances of the plot, but I was drawn to this grim sci-fi film and I was compelled by it. I got the Alien Saga VHS box set for Christmas of 1997, and then I finally saw the opening to the film, plus little extra bits of violence the TV version had cut out. It would also be the first time I would see the film without any commercial breaks, and it would be in much better quality, as the TV version I owned was recorded over other content, so every now and then, random, often amusing clips would jump in. 2003, I would get the DVD box set and, like everyone else, see the assembly cut for the first time, which then cemented my love for this film even more, and really brought to light the faults the theatrical cut had, something that for myself didn't really shine through as much on my initial watch, and with no internet to dive into those lost scenes, I had no reason to question it at such a young age. But with this new cut of the movie, we got to see a closer look into what director David Fincher and his film crew were aiming for. But with all that said, what I'm presenting with this introduction really is how from a very early age this film intrigued me. To sum it up, I was fortunate enough to be in a place where the film spoke for itself. It's well known in the cultural zeitgeist that this film had a troubled production. And yet despite that, the final product which emerged from the crazy studio meddling and hardships felt by the crew was a story that was more intellectual than most people would expect from a sequel called Alien 3. But unfortunately, the majority of people failed to see a phoenix rising from those ashes. To be clear though, I am not surprised that so many were turned off by the direction the story took. It's a stark, depressing contrast to its gun-toting punch-the-air-with-excitement predecessor, which ends on a high note of Ripley returning to Earth with a potential new family under her wing. And whilst both its predecessors are beloved by many, and rightly so for the masterful stories they tell, when it comes to Alien 3, most people shy away from this story of loss, death, and ultimately redemption. I suspect because it deals with how fragile mortal life is, these fictional characters then become vessels to explore that concept, and many people don't really want to go on that journey. For lack of a better term, the happy ending of Aliens is what a lot of people prefer. They'll jump ship at that point in the story to savour the glory of Ripley's success, and I don't blame them. I'm sympathetic to turning away from the gut-wrenching bluntness of what came next. But I would argue that it was a more meaningful end for Ripley than what Aliens, and especially Alien Resurrection, could ever offer the audience. Essentially, the original Alien saga is a story of birth, life and death, with Alien Resurrection's role being obvious from its title, and like Ripley within that 4th chapter, if you bring something back from the dead, it won't ever be the same. The equivalent can be said for many levels of that movie, the most apparent being how that chapter doesn't necessarily fit with the tone of the others. But we're not really here to discuss Alien Resurrection. That we can save for another day. Alien is centered around the horrors and fears of childbirth, with imagery playing into this idea like those of Cain being impregnated and finally torn apart by a baby alien, to the Nostromo's warm, brightly lit, comfortable computer room aptly named Mother, which is complemented with subtle breathing sounds giving the atmosphere of being inside a mother's womb. The next film, Aliens, focuses on life itself. In this movie, we learn more about Ripley's family, how she had a daughter who lived a full life and died whilst Ripley was lost in space. We see her care for Newt, a child who survived the initial attack on the ill-fated colony on LV-426, and then we have the aliens themselves. We see their hives, how they work for a queen who lays the eggs, so more aliens can be born. We see how the queen can control the drones and how they will protect the hive at any costs by working together as one nightmarish horde. This all ends with a battle between two mothers, and Ripley single-handedly saving the day, with a surrogate daughter and a potential new lover in the form of Marine Hicks, alongside her as they peacefully journey back to Earth. Then Alien 3 comes into play and deals with loss and what it means to embrace our mortality and transcend the inevitable by doing the right thing even against all the odds. Over the course of the 2-hour 30-minute movie, Ripley discovers a Xenomorph is in fact loose inside the prison, killing people one by one, that she was in fact impregnated with a queen alien during hypersleep and now holds the future of the monstrous species in her chest. And to make matters worse, the company is close by. They have received the information about the alien from the EEV's neuroscan of Ripley and are en route to the prison in order to retrieve Ripley and ultimately the Queen for their research, something Ellen Ripley is totally against. She knows they cannot prevent the organism from spreading and dooming mankind to oblivion if it ever gets back to Earth. Whilst Ripley had certainly faced insane horrors in her previous outings, with this movie she is also pinned into a corner with absolutely no way out. With the discovery of a queen alien inside her chest, she is on a ticking clock to death, surrounded by a hostile environment in a seemingly uncaring and unforgiving universe. Despite being set in the future, the forgotten backwater planet of Farina 161 would have touches of Art Nouveau integrated into its design by the filmmakers. This was to invoke medieval old world imagery and lean into the religious theming of the plot. This is future history, so even though we're looking at a setting way off into the future, Farina 161 looks and feels old, lost, forgotten, and practically dead. Characters constantly talk about how nothing works, how when mapping out old areas of the facility they have to light the way with candles, which invokes more religious imagery, and constant low camera angles make us, the audience, feel like we're on our knees praying to the sky for an answer from God. All this sets the stage and enhances the religious theming we're going to discuss, and I liken Ripley's arrival to this desolate wasteland to the inhospitable world Adam and Eve found themselves in after being exiled from the Garden of Eden. In the beginning, we see Ripley blaming herself for the death of the child Newt. This is made apparent when she apologises to her dead body in the morgue. This is also present when the bodies of Hicks and Newt are cremated. We get a shot of her eyes interlaced over top, the film drumming into us the depths of Ripley's sadness and her grief. There is a sense that Newt and Hicks are the summation of all those lives lost around her since the first movie, and Ripley is bearing the weight of those lost souls. So despite being in a prison full of the worst criminals, Ripley believes she has missed the mark. She sees herself as the most sinful person at Farina 161. For all her bravery against an unspeakable creature and a company who sees human lives as expendable to obtain a specimen, she was rewarded with nothing but pain and the deaths of others around her, some more innocent than herself. The film clearly portrays this with a visual cue by having her shave her head due to a lice problem. She then blends into the other sinners, and she disregards any form of safety from them. She is one of them now, who belongs here amongst the damned. I've always found it odd when reading criticism of the film when people make statements like, the characters all look the same, you can't tell them apart, or why should we care for a bunch of rapists, murderers, or child molesters? Firstly, whether intentional or not, I think the important thing to glean from all the characters looking the same is to show how they are all equal as sinners. As mentioned before, this is why Ripley ends up looking like she is one of them. Another thing that bolsters this idea is the character 85, a company man who doesn't see himself as a criminal or a sinner. He has got a loving home, a wife, a child waiting for him when he returns on the next rotation. He stands out from the others in his look and general milquetoast personality. He even wears a hat to cover his shaved head, which makes him easier to identify from everyone else. And secondly, I don't think this film is looking for the audience to overlook the horrors these characters have committed, but to recognise them. So when they're in the face of certain death, you can learn forgiveness for these horrible characters as they step up to do everything they can to kill the alien. That said though, it is worthy to note that at first they do try to kill and trap the alien, but for their own benefit, by setting fire to a certain section of the prison to draw the beast into a room of which it cannot escape. But this moment wasn't a redeeming act for them, and so the plan backfires with the alien killing one prisoner, which sets off a series of explosions killing many others. The alien does eventually get captured after one prisoner called Junior makes the heroic move to lure the monster into the preset trap, a move they would all learn to accept later. But with the alien trapped, their journey to redemption for themselves and in the eyes of the audience is incomplete. So in steps Golic, a character who had previously seen the creature mercilessly kill in front of him and had become obsessed with the alien itself, seeing it as the devil of whom he now worships. Golic releases the alien and thus forces these characters down a path to real repentance by allowing them to all agree to do what Junior had done before. This is where the religious message is deeply embedded. The most horrible people known to mankind, our own monsters, make the ultimate sacrifice by using themselves as bait to lure the alien into a lead mould in an attempt to kill it. No one will know of their sacrifice. No one will thank them. The company will likely bury all evidence of this event ever happening. They could choose to wait for the company to arrive, but as Ripley points out to them, that would also spell certain death, but without the act of at least trying to do the right thing. So essentially, they would not find redemption waiting for so-called help to arrive, the character Dylan signalling this loud and clear to the audience watching at home. So, in the story, they accept their sins and face judgment. The film is not making a case for the audience to like these characters for what they've done, but to forgive them for their sacrifice. And back to Ripley, she makes the ultimate thankless sacrifice by dooming the Xenomorphs to extinction and not allowing the company to obtain a specimen at the cost of her own life. The audience knows she doesn't need redemption. She's not at fault for any of the hardships and deaths that took place, but as mentioned previously, her character feels the guilt of losing Newt and Hicks and everyone else previously. In other words, she is bearing the weight of all the sins of mankind within herself. This is embodied in the form of the last queen alien implanted in her chest. But in order for mankind to be saved, she must willingly accept the sins of all others and die. If Ripley is Jesus in this narrative, then the prisoners are representing mankind. This single shot is the most obvious when it comes to the religious symbolism in Alien 3, with Ripley falling into the flames of oblivion in an overt crucifix pose, but it's the moment where the true meaning of her arc finally takes place. Despite the harrowing and seemingly pointless universe Ripley found herself in, she still did the right thing, and she did that to redeem mankind as a whole. Now I must reaffirm here that I don't know whether what I'm about to dive into was intended to be the case by the filmmakers. It is merely my interpretation of how the events played out on screen, but I do find it interesting how much it aligns with other religious subtext present elsewhere. So in Alien 3 there is a small but significant detail of the character Morse making a deal with God to live forever. This is brought to our attention around the end of the second act and the beginning of the third by the character Dylan, after Morse makes a gaffe that he would rather just sit on his ass and do nothing than face up to the alien. He agrees with the company man Aaron, or 85, that they should wait for the rescue team to arrive, which causes Dylan to remind everyone of the deal Morse made.
How about if I sit here on my ass?
No problem. Oh, I forgot. You're the guy that's made a deal with God to live forever, huh?
Now keep Aaron in mind, as he'll play an important role later which shines light onto the connection between Morse and Aaron with God. So Morse does the noble thing and plays his part in trapping and killing the alien, and by the end of the film he is the only survivor from Fury 161. The film purports that the deal with God is legit, but there is a detail which takes place that I've yet to hear anyone else bring up, which I believe shows exactly why the deal is given to Morse by God. During the climax where Michael Bishop is begging Ripley to take his offer of returning with the company, Ripley denies that she can trust him. She puts a gate between herself and them, and Morse begins to move the machinery they are on away from the company men. This show of defiance causes one of the Wayland commandos to get trigger happy and shoot Morse in the leg to disable him. Michael Bishop yells at the commando to stop as he tries to keep the facade of his offer to Ripley intact. When Morse is shot though, he yells out "Jesus," to which Ripley, our Jesus-like figure in the story, kneels down to help Morse to his feet again, whilst simultaneously asking for his help. Morse then doesn't hesitate to inquire what Ripley is asking for before we cut away. Now we don't see the conversation between the two, but we soon learn that Morse has agreed to take Ripley over the furnace so she can sacrifice herself. Morse had every chance to give Ripley up to the company at this point. He could have buckled to their demands after being shot, but without second thought he chose to do the right thing, and I have come to see this act as the moment where his deal with God was set in place, because one cannot simply ask God for something and expect it to just happen, without a choice being given by God to see if one is worthy of what is being asked for. For the character Aaron, though, a much more terrible end is met, and it's done by his own blind idiocy. Throughout the film, the inmates of the prison nicknamed him 85, which is a jab at his IQ, a detail some of them learnt after peeking at his personnel file the day he arrived. With this and the many times throughout the film where Aaron doesn't understand something, the film sets up that despite his generally nice persona, he is not exactly smart. Couple this with the fact that he's not religious like the others, and you get the film laying out the groundwork for his eventual undoing.
They have moved to a higher place.
Crazy bastards. Andrews used to call them Dylan's God Squad. Keeps them out of mischief.
You're not the religious type.
Me? Shit, no, I've got a job.
So during the climax, after Morse is shot, Aaron takes up a large metal tool and in a moment of desperate rage attacks Michael Bishop from behind. He almost severs Bishop's left ear after cracking the metal object across the skull, but doesn't kill him. Aaron is then shot by a commando several times and falls to the floor below where he dies. Aaron and Morse both begin the third act by wanting to wait for the company to arrive, but it's Morse who opts to go with the plan and face the alien head on, whilst Aaron decides to wait for the company away from the fight. Only after seeing the commando shoot Morse does Aaron realise Ripley was right and decides to act out against his superiors. He chose to do what he thought was right, and although his attack was a brave one, it did nothing to help anyone. By choosing to wait for the company and placing his faith in the idea that the company also wanted the alien dead, he was putting his own family at risk, something Ripley knew and warned him many times.
What if they don't want to kill it?
They get back.
No.
They're not lunatics, you know. Gotta kill it. Right?
And even though there were moments he seemed doubtful over whether he was right, he still cowardly waited for them anyway. His Achilles heel was always not thinking through a situation and leaving things too late. And in some respects, God punished him for this, leaving his family without a father. What many critics lay at the feet of this film, whether they enjoyed the movie or not, is that it's nihilistic.
On its own, Alien 3 isn't that bad. It's dark, moody, nihilistic.
It so doesn't work on so many levels.
It's very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
But not even like, okay, so it's a nihilistic movie, but even on its own nihilistic standards, the bar it sets there, it's still unsatisfying.
Yeah.
As the intended final chapter of a trilogy, it seems strange that Alien 3 should be so nihilistic and bitter.
Alien 3 marks another tonal departure from its predecessors, eschewing most of the action and sci-fi elements in favor of nihilistic melodrama.
I cannot begin to count the amount of times I've heard this label given to Alien 3, and every time I think the message has been lost on these critics, which, if that was the case, I find myself surprised by, because the film is pretty obvious in a number of visual and audible ways that it's not a nihilistic story. For example, at the beginning of the movie when Ripley crashes on Farina 161, we're presented with a shot of a sun disappearing behind the planet, and the entire screen falls into darkness as the music fills our ears with dread. It's true the beginning places our heroine into a nihilistic, virtually unendurable world, but if the movie never changed, then it would be right to label the film nihilistic. However, at the end, as soon as Ripley makes her sacrifice, the fires of hell die down and the sun returns from behind the planet with triumphant music blaring out, washing us with relief that the darkness has been thwarted. Ripley has brought light back into the universe. It's a hopeful, meaningful ending, a bittersweet ending, and not a nihilistic one that rejects the fundamental aspects of human existence. It embraces them, and like a character arc, it makes the meaning more apparent when juxtaposed to the dire situation at the start of the movie. A change has occurred, in this case one for the better. Ripley has saved the day, for all days. I think one of the key areas where this idea of the film being nihilistic stems from is Alien 3's relationship to aliens. The argument is made that with the death of Newton Hicks, Alien 3 renders all of what Ripley fought for as pointless. She never obtained her new family, she never made it back to Earth, and even lost her own life by the end of it. Now I can see and respect this position, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I sympathise with those who hold Aliens as a place where the story ends for them. But with that said, Alien 3 doesn't make aliens pointless. It just sets Ripley on a path of ultimate meaning, and the deaths of Newton Hicks are not simply left behind with no respect for how much their characters meant to Ripley and the audience. It plays up the grief for their deaths to such a degree that Ripley's sadness is virtually palpable. Had the filmmakers just brushed their deaths aside and characters forgot about them after 5 minutes, I would totally agree, their deaths would feel pointless. But the very plot of Alien 3 fundamentally hinges on their deaths, and everything we see Ripley do, from the moment she suspects the alien within Newt's chest, to the funeral, to her plummeting into the furnace where Newt and Hicks were also cremated, is to reflect on how much those characters meant to us. It would have been very easy, given the huge success of Aliens, for 20th Century Fox to make a happy family sequel where Newt and Hicks are with Ripley along for the ride, and had William Gibson's draft of the film made it into reality, we might have seen it, but for some reason that wasn't the case, and from the chaos of its production, I would argue a beautifully haunting sequel was born. Alien 3 doesn't spit in the face of its predecessor, but mourns it. No studio has ever, or most likely will ever, make a sequel like this again, because, quite frankly, there's no money in actually letting go. Which is why not long after, the studio made Alien Resurrection to try and take back what they did, and made a new ending to Ripley's journey that was just hollow. 30 years on and I'm still in awe of how the filmmakers managed to achieve such a meaningful movie through all the chaos during its production. Many still see it as nihilistic, which translates to it being a godless or meaningless movie. But that couldn't be further from the truth. I hope this video has proven otherwise. As Ripley says, the prisoners found God at the arse end of space. So too the concepts of Judeo-Christian religion found their way into the third Alien film. For myself, this movie was a gateway to understanding the basics of religious thought around forgiveness, sacrifice, and morality itself. I think it's Sigourney Weaver's best performance as Ellen Ripley, whose nuance and commitment to giving Ripley a biblical end really adds weight to the longevity of this movie and the story which built up to it. And recently I have appreciated to no end the direction Ridley Scott took with his Alien prequel movies, 2012's Prometheus and 2017's Alien Covenant, which dive into a very similar wheelhouse of concepts and narrative symbolism as Alien 3 once did. I think it really adds gravity to the saga as a whole because the Xenomorph is revered as cinema's greatest monster, so what better way to frame it as the product of a false god taken out by the utmost righteous.